yeah, the coalitional thing, it's just the nature of things. You have to do this. You have to partner with people and who might be in if everything were different, then they might be your enemy on the other side. But for now, it's like we have to work together.
Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where I give you practical theology for everyday life. As always, I'm your host, Corey Wing. Did you know that all of my interview segments are now being added to my audio podcast on Apple and Spotify? Simply search for Civically Minded and enjoy solid Christian content on your long commute, while you're at work or the gym, or wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. And be sure to tell a friend how they too can enjoy Civically Minded. And if you enjoy my content, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. My guest today is the host of The Wade Show with Wade on X and YouTube, and the Wadecast podcast with Wade, of course, on Canon Plus. His quick wit and acerbic observations on politics and current events have made him a guest on shows like Fox News, Aaron McIntyre, and the Will Cain podcast, and much more. I am honored to welcome, honestly, one of the shows that I don't miss. And as a guy that does this, I don't have time to watch a lot of shows, but I never miss Wade's. When something new comes out, I sit down and watch what he has to say. So it truly is my honor to welcome to Civically Minded, Wade Stotts.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm glad that you're joining us today. Some of my audience certainly will know who you are, but there's so much content out there now that inevitably, you can't know everything that's out there, and you certainly don't have time to watch everything that pops up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I am, and I'm not just blowing smoke. I really am a big fan of what you do. And I came up with the acerbic wit. That was not from him. So if the audience is watching, the quick wit and acerbic stuff, that was from me. Those are my observations of kind of his brand. But as a guy that's been a British humor fan my whole life, I mean, I was like a kid and I was into British humor, even as like a 10, 11-year-old kid. I was watching Monty Python and laughing, and I think even getting the jokes. I've just always loved someone that can think quickly and kind of jab back in a way that isn't just a guttural, hey, well, F you, buddy. I mean, that there's but there's substance to it. You can tell that you've listened to the arguments and that you've actually engaged with them mentally, and that's that. Talking heads, there are aplenty, but a lot of them can't think beyond whatever's on the cue card. So I'd say that to your credit.
I'm glad. Well, so I also grew up watching Monty Python on PBS, and as a guy who's not a huge fan of the public broadcasting system, I am thankful that they did show random Monty Python Flying Circus reruns. And everybody's kind of chasing, every person who likes comedy is kind of chasing that feeling of watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail for the first time when you're 13. There's a real moment when that happens, and you go like,
endlessly
quotable. Another planet. Oh yeah.
I mean that and is so now decades later. I mean, it's just and I agree with you. Public television is a horrible plight on humanity. That and maybe Mr. Rogers and Bob Ross are like the only three things that I've ever enjoyed maybe on public television. Well, when we first talked about having you on the on the program, one of the things that I'd mentioned as we were going back and forth, and now it's a little bit, a couple weeks old, and in the modern era, that's an eternity. Was how that the longest government shutdown in U.S. history had just recently ended when you and I kind of started talking about doing an episode together. And I would be remiss if we don't at least touch on that, because I do think that it was a pretty big piece of news, maybe for the year, but certainly for the last month or two. And I think it's even bigger news than most people realize, because in that fiasco, I think there was a lot of stuff that the average person missed, not only about this shutdown, but why they keep happening and why it's almost inevitable that we're going to have another one at the end of January. So can you kind of fill people in on maybe some of the things that you saw about this shutdown, or just even shutdowns in general, and what you think the average, normie that's just going to work and turns on the news maybe once a week missed?
Well, the good thing, one good thing about keeping up with late night TV, which is something that I am one of the only 3 or 4 people who does, is that I can see what the left is upset about and what they're excited about. And the week that everybody was upset with Trump for talking about H-1B visas and all this sort of stuff was the same week that the shutdown ended and that Jon Stewart was screaming at the camera, talking about how these cowardly Democrats have caved to Trump and given him everything he wanted. And that I think shows at some level the media disconnect. We're not watching each other's show, like we don't know what's going on. And I think Jonathan Kieferman has talked about how like the fact that blue sky is its own thing, we can't see what they're freaking out about anymore on social media.
That's
And so
right.
the infighting thing makes sense. So like there was a lot of conservative infighting around that time, especially with the Tucker controversies and all this sort of stuff. But all that was happening as as the left is freaking out at their leadership and saying, you have just given Trump everything. This is total victory for President Donald Trump. And we're not talking about that at all. Like we're not talking about total victory for President Donald Trump because we're distracted. We like fighting. So yes, it was a huge story and huge, not necessarily because it impacted a lot of jobs. Like it obviously impacted jobs. It obviously impacted plenty of other things along the line. I think Rust Vote sort of came forward to shine in quite a few ways. The EBT scandal came to the forefront of everybody's mind, and I'm really thankful for those developments. I think that if it hadn't gone as long as it did, then the EBT thing stuff that wouldn't have become as much of a central issue as it's now become. So the reason that anybody's even talking about this stuff is because it was running out and the people who came along told how much they get per month and or at least how much some people are getting per month for EBT stuff. So yeah, it was a huge story. It was a huge story at the time. And there are plenty of places where it's like we scored a touchdown and nobody on the team noticed, and so nobody's doing an end zone dance. And it's like, hey guys, let's celebrate a little bit. Like there's obviously stuff to work out, plenty of conservative things on the right to deal with problems like that. But yeah, let's have a little celebration for the victory over the left there. If nothing else, that Jon Stewart is having a rough time.
There's that wit. The and I agree with you on everything you said. I did an entire episode, and like you, I do a monologue. I do a lot of monologue type segments too, though obviously I do guest segments too. And I started doing guest segments because I realized I was getting lonely. I was watching a lot of my friends, Joshua Hames and all these other guys that I've gotten to be friends with through this weird content creation world, and I was like, they always seem to have so much fun on camera, even just the cross politic guys, because that's three
Yeah,
guys in a room together, right? And there I am just kind of staring at the screen, and sometimes you don't know if you're an echo chamber or if you're really prescient because no one's in the room to tell you. So it's I thought, man, I'm gonna start inviting guests on just so I can have conversations with people that I respect and would never have another opportunity to meet. But as someone who does a lot of monologue segments, it's a wonderful way to kind of process your own thoughts in a way that maybe you wouldn't have done if you weren't forced to sit down and give them,
yeah, oh
and
yeah,
so I did an entire episode on it, and I didn't really even talk about the win, though I agree with you. I think in many ways it was a win for us on the conservative side of the ticket. What I talked about how it's also a loss, and let
okay,
me unpack that for you because I'd love to get your opinion. One of the things that I said was when government shutdowns happen at all, and they happen pretty frequently these days, um, and none has, as I said earlier, been to the length or the degree of this one. All that the normie voter remembers when they go to the polls in the midterms next year is who shut off the SNAP benefits. Why was my flight delayed when all of the air traffic controllers weren't working and getting paid? And so there were all of these just kind of practical pain points for the average person, right? And sadly, because most of the American voting population doesn't inform themselves on anything really. And again, I'm not saying that to be ham-fisted or mean or it's just the truth. They don't do a good job of being an educated voter populace. They just think, well, who hurt my wallet and delayed that flight that I had to have to to New York City, and gosh, I'm going to vote against those people. And since we control all of the main powers of government as the conservatives right now, the left is pretty disorganized, one, and two, they don't have any major mechanisms that they can go against the president like they did when they were in power. So I thought this was a real way that they thought they could stick it to him, and at least lose some midterm votes, um, because, well, we made it painful for the American people. So what say you about kind of a take like that?
Yeah, it's certainly true that the party in power is usually blamed for the shutdown. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I would be interested to kind of study the general marketing of it and who people did blame. I don't know what the polling is on that, but who knows about polling anyway. But yes, it is typically seen as something that the party responsible for is the one who's in power. I'd be interested to see, yeah, if this turns out the same way. I'm curious though. I mean, this is a kind of tough thing about living in a sort of universal suffrage democracy, is that the people who are making decisions about government policy are the ones who are on SNAP benefits. That's a really strange or
Yeah.
like way of operating, that that those are the people who get to decide if those people remain in power. So I yeah, it's a problem that does definitely go deeper than just the marketing of everything. But sadly, yes, the people who feel the benefit most are the people who will vote for the people in power. So if people broadly feel like there is a personal benefit to voting for somebody, then they will. And I think that that's something that conservatives, because of the general idea that conservatives are the principled ones and that Democrats are the ones who give away free stuff, that the conservatives are kind of destined at some level to lose big battles like elections, because they're not willing to sort of think about what's the benefit, what do I get out of voting for this person. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see if I don't assume that a lot of the people who were on SNAP benefits were diehard Trump voters, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe some people flipped. But I don't know. I don't know who, if anybody flipped. I'd be curious. Yeah, again, how else would we know other than polling? But and who turns out in November of 26. But we'll see. We'll see.
No, I again, a lot of what you said I would agree with. I do think that while SNAP benefit recipients are
Mhm.
probably not the backbone of the Republican Party, they again, the shifts that have happened, I'm 47 years old. The shifts that have happened politically, even in my own lifetime, are wild. I mean, and especially in the last major election in 24, Donald Trump was able to poll with people that the Republicans normally just don't have any chance with. So it is kind of a where do we go from here moment. The tent
Mhm.
got very, very big, and that can be great, right? That can be wonderful. But one of the things that you operate there in Moscow, and one of the things that I think you guys do a wonderful job about beating the drum on is Christless conservatism isn't much conservatism. I mean, there's so if the tent gets so big that Harmeet Dillon is getting to pray to her pagan demon god, at the RNC, the tent might be a little too big. And again, and I've got
Yeah.
no personal animus against Harmeet Dillon. She's probably a lovely person. Um, but at some point, the enemy of my enemy is my friend mentality can only really go so far. And so when I do look at something like what just transpired, it's confusing to me to kind of ascertain where do we go from here. And on this, and this is going to be a huge callback to something you did quite a while ago. We connected through a mutual friend named Parker Brown, who runs a channel called the Watch Well podcast, and he had you on a while back to talk about a somewhat obscure movie called The Informant, which I thought was a great episode. I enjoyed the episode immensely. But one of the things that I thought about, and I've thought about a lot since I watched that episode, was your takeaway on the main character or characters even of that obscure film, which is everyone kind of has white knight syndrome anyway. You know that
Yeah.
it's a movie full of bad guys who are all convinced they're good guys. So when I look at what went on in the government shutdown or what goes on in around the beltway in general, that's the whole world up there is we're all the good guys, and it's like, well, no, somebody has to be the good guy and somebody is clearly the bad guy. So I mean, can you kind of talk to that whole paradigm, again, just because this is something I'm talking about, an episode that you did that I've watched, and a lot of my folks probably haven't. Kind of explain what I'm talking about there, not so much in regards to the film. If you're curious about the film, go watch that. It was a great episode. Go to the Watch Well podcast. But kind of the whole idea of white knighting, and what we see this in the Christian world, we see it in politics. Kind of walk my folks through what that is, and why we see it so often.
Yeah, I think that one key. I will talk about one piece of that movie, but the main character in this movie is to maybe spoil a little bit of it, is convinced that he is going to go up against this company that he works for by working with the FBI to expose a lot of corruption that's happening at this company. And slowly but surely, throughout the movie, you realize that he's been lying and embezzling throughout the entirety of the process. So he is addressing a problem, a structural problem with the company, but he's also at some level compromised and ends up, you can watch the movie for the rest of it. But throughout there, he sees himself as a character in a movie, and specifically, he watches the Tom Cruise movie, The Firm, and it's about this guy who joins a law firm that's corrupt, and he exposes all their corruption, makes tapes and reveals it to people. So that's he's inspired by this to think that he is the just the central figure of this exposing the corruption world. And how could Tom Cruise and The Firm ever have any kind of compromise? In the same way, he at the opening of it, he's talking about, like, this is just like a Crichton novel, talking about Rising Sun, which is a movie about exposing a bunch of corruption in a Japanese company. So it's these characters, and broadly, generally, people think of themselves as operating like characters in a movie. I am if there's a problem, if there's a structural problem that I'm addressing, if there's a thing that I'm fighting, then the movie can't there are very few movies that can bear the weight of the corruption in the system and the corruption in the individual who's fighting the systems up against the system. And The Informant is one of those that has both of those, and it's very rare for a movie to be that honest about
Yeah.
how deep this stuff goes. So I love that movie. And yes, that is absolutely true. That if you're addressing some evil outside of yourself, you can usually do it as a way of ignoring something that's going on in yourself. Um, and I think broadly on the point of sort of coalitional politics, like it's a strange. It's the kind of thing you have to do at some level right now. If we were just trying to build a movement with all the most rock ribbed Christians, conservatives who checked every box on my belief systems checklist, then we'd be working with a pretty small crew. And
Yeah,
so
we
at some level,
lose.
there,
Yeah, we
yeah,
lose.
yeah, and they're going to have to be partnerships that we wouldn't do in a vacuum, or like in sitting in a philosophy class about who the perfect partner is. It's the realities of politics. You have to work with people, and that's yeah, that's the state of things. The piece that I think has to happen with MAGA, what's good about the MAGA thing is at some level it does coalesce around Trump. And so if Trump's interests, so RFK comes in and people ask, "Hey, how can you work with him? He's like not as pro-choice as you are, right?" That's the way they frame it. Then like Trump just says, "You are this guy. You work in this lane, and I will have other people working in this lane." So coalitional politics without leadership is just chaos. And so I think that that's kind of what's happening, is that Trump's leadership is giving people lanes. And you can, say, like, you can argue about if this person was the right person to put here, all that sort of stuff is fair game. But I'm optimistic generally about the Christian direction of MAGA, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk, and as JD Vance at some level takes the leadership helm, or at least is preparing to do so. So I think, yeah, the coalitional thing, it's just the nature of things. You have to do this. You have to partner with people, and who might be if everything were different, then they might be your enemy on the other side. But for now, it's like we have to work together, and let's do so peacefully and with leadership involved. So we're all falling under some leadership. So I think Trump's leadership is good but flawed, but I like I'm definitely think that he's a good central figure for all of these disparate interests to gather around.
I would agree. I think a strong man figure, is necessary to take all of the ego And
Mhm.
again, people talk about Trump has an ego. Well, of course I mean, I said
Yeah, yeah.
this about Obama. Shortly after Trump got in for his first term, people were, of course, already slinging that accusation, and most of them being very left leaning who were doing so. And of course, their favorite president of recent history has been Barack Obama. And I said, you mean the guy who has wrote three autobiographies since he left office, the cumulative total of which is larger than scripture. I mean, this guy thinks he has more to say about himself than Jesus Christ. I mean, it's and you think that Donald Trump has an ego. I mean, the very nature of leadership at that level, especially for any leadership to some degree, but especially by the time you get to a leadership level like a president of any nation, but certainly the president of the United States, you have had to have the conversation in the mirror of, I think things would be better under this guy. I mean, I mean
Yeah.
that's had to have happened at some point.
Mhm.
No one could just mealy mouth convince you to run for that level of an office if you were just convinced you weren't the right guy for it. I mean, you have had to, prior to anyone else endorsing you, endorsed yourself. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
the nature of the game. So
right.
so I think it's such a classification error when people talk about, oh, he's got an ego. I'm like, he's a president. Nah, I mean,
Well, yeah, we all like the idea of George Washington, the sort of reluctant president, the guy who didn't want the job and quit after 2 terms and all this sort of stuff. The truth is, in many ways, we do not live in George Washington's day, and we don't have. It's not like we have a bunch of George Washingtons that we're turning down so that we can make sure to have, Donald Trump. Like that's not how this is working. We're not the same country, and we don't have the same quality of people. And I think that's, yeah, a perfectly reasonable thing to be like, yeah, if you're in politics, you think you can solve problems, and you can obviously think like I can solve problems without being having an inflated ego and being a cartoon character. But I think that, yeah, if the idea that we're just turning down all these George Washingtons to get the biggest striver in office, I think that is true. But like it's very rare in to find people who have at some level sacrificed things for presidential office, and I think that Trump is one of the few figures in
uh,
the world in history, in American history, who has laid down further profits, laid down further prestige. He could have gone on. He could, he didn't have to run for a second term. He didn't have to get shot, right? He didn't have to go through all of these legal things. He didn't have to have his home raided. All of these things happened because he said, "I want to go and do it again." And so, and again, not taking the salary. Like there are plenty of ways in which there's been the Trump is not just yes, there's glory that he wants, right? But it's not just glory at the expense of the American people, which is what we've had for too long.
well, and it really, I mean, again, my tagline for this whole show is practical theology for everyday life. So I always try to take whatever topic we're talking about and somehow wrap it into, how does this affect us? As a Christian, say I'm not into politics, so I mean, I barely vote. Maybe I don't vote. I'm sure I've got people that watch the show that don't. Um, well, then let me kind of transcribe that same philosophical or theological idea into an everyday life event. If you want to have good kids, you know, you want to have a successful marriage, you have to do the things, including the self-abasing things, the difficult things to accomplish that, right? I mean, you're
Mhm.
not going to get good kids without having some disciplinary mechanism in place. Now, that can look very different from maybe the guy, across the pew. It should look biblical, obviously, but even that can look different. Or you want a
Mhm.
successful marriage, or you want to be successful in business. You want to, whatever it is you're doing, you want to do it well. That's going to require some modicum of personal sacrifice. And to your point, most of the Beltway for most of my life has only gained from it. I mean, you look at an AOC type figure, who was, schlepping at a bar, prior to
Mhm.
becoming what she is now, and you kind of go, "This has been pretty good for you." I mean, I mean, and even the bad that it's maybe cost her, as far as she gets laughed at, she gets pointed at. all of us have that. I mean, let's be brutally honest. Now, we may not have it to the degree, that they do in public office, but I mean, when you and I agreed to start doing what it is we do, when the first day that I recorded something and threw it out here into the world, I opened myself up to that guy's fat and he's an idiot, and I'm pretty sure he's bald under that hat. Yes, probably, and definitely. You know, so so I mean, there's yeah, there's that's just part of putting yourself into the public eye. And if you're not prepared for that, then my advice to anyone is then don't do it.
Right.
Um, the more you expose yourself to public criticism, the more you receive public criticism. But I agree with you that he hasn't taken a salary since any of his first term, none since he started his second term. It's cost him immense capital, professionally, personally, financially. I mean, he's been maligned in every way humanly possible. And then on top of it all, to your point, he was shot and someone attempted to shoot him a second time. I mean, this is a guy that really it could have many grandfathers and great grandfathers would have long ago went, I'll take the gold watch, thanks.
Right, right. Oh yeah, and all of it at some level in pursuit of a different kind of glory, right? There's a reputational thing. He wants to be the greatest American president, right? And I would rather have somebody who wants to be the greatest American president who sacrifices something of his own comfort, um, excuse me, and of his own like finances to be able to do that so that other people remember him that way, rather than just pure comfort for his own sake, still get the covers of magazines, don't get yelled at every day. And yeah, he wants to be a historic figure, and
Yeah.
obviously at some level he is a historic figure, and that there's nothing wrong with that. So like having an ego, being self-centered, and over here being wanting to do something big that people remember you for. That's just life. Like that's how everybody wants that. Every man wants to be that kind of person. So it's yes, there's plenty of sacrifice, and there's also he wants glory on the other side of it. That's how sacrifice works, and that's what he's doing it for. It's not just kill me, like put me in the corner. Nobody should care about me. There's glory on the other side, and I think that's what he wants. And in his own sort of non-biblical, non-Christian, like not inspired by a biblical principle, but that's just manhood. That's everybody knows that's what people want and what sacrifice is ultimately for.
And even those, I've been preaching out of Ecclesiastes recently at church. And even so, I bring that up to say, excuse me, even someone like Solomon, who absolutely
Mhm.
did have the biblical side, the Christian side that, I agree President Trump, I don't think personally has. I think he's surrounded himself with some wonderful Christians.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping and praying, like all of Christendom, that they will eventually be the catalyst that the Lord uses to bring him to faith. I don't think that's happened up till now because I don't see any evidence of it. But I mean, certainly Solomon has that. And even in his own journey, which is what really Ecclesiastes is all about, is, man, I tried it. If it could be tried, I promise I tried it. And he concludes with what he concludes with, fear God, keep his commandments. Um, but I think in modern Christendom, and there are arguments about how this could where this happened, where it started, what precipitated Christianity becoming this way. But modern Christianity has become so, again, kind of self-defacing that anyone pursuing a high level of competency in almost any field, I get, and I'm sure you get this too. I get told by well-intended Christians often. I mean, some of which are very dear to me, close personal friends, even, some relatives. Uh, well, you don't want a kingdom build. I mean, as you grow that whole podcast and that whole thing, be very careful you're not king. And I'm like, and I hear you. That I'm not saying that pride is absolutely an ancient sin, and Satan still uses it as a massive temptation because it still works.
Mhm.
So I mean, I understand where they're coming from, but it has become so easy in the Christian community, especially to just throw that at people and go, well, so don't try anything that hard. Let's just color in the lines and be quiet and do you see
Yeah.
that too?
Sure, yeah, I think that there's, if Christians are doing that alongside, sort of people who have selfish ambition, if there's no Christian ambition fighting against the selfish ambition, then the ambitious people are always gonna win. That's just the way things kind of happen, and so, yeah, if people try to cut down, any kind of ambition, any kind of positive, hey, I'd really like, I invented this thing and I really think people would like it. Then if people try to tamp that down, then yeah, that's the world we live in right now. Is a bunch of like usually like older women talking down to like men who say you're too ambitious, you too want you like you think too highly of yourself. Don't do that. You just go through the system, you get the degree, you'll get a good job in a big company that already exists because of somebody not with Christian ambition, but with selfish ambition. So you
Yeah,
get to go into their system, right? You get to all the accreditation, you get all the like sort of diplomas, and then once you get all these certificates, then you can go work in a system that is doing something you wouldn't have done, that maybe is worse than what you would have done. But yeah, if somebody gets to dream big and it's just the secularists, that's really bad news for the world, and really bad news for Christians too, if they actually want to do something that lasts and has a positive impact. Yeah, I do see that, and I think there's part of that is, yes, there's a self-effacing thing in Christian circles. It's also like there's a general trend that if somebody wants to do something new and big, then like, oh, you think you're better than me, right? So, oh yeah, you have a podcast, yeah, yeah, you have something to say, or like, hey, I want to start a Christian school, like, oh, you think you're better than me for sending my kids to a whatever school, like, oh, I want to start a new church. Hey, there aren't enough good churches around. What's wrong with my church?
yeah.
And so like people get like that's very human, and like people will, it's just envy. It's just like that's the way conflict works. Is that if anybody wants to start something, thinks that something needs to be done, yeah, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with me? And I think personally, it becomes about, yeah, well, do you think something bad about my church? Think something bad about my school? What are you saying about my parenting? So that's it's ugly, and that's the way things are. But yeah, sometimes somebody does have to be able to take those slings and arrows to be able to, yeah, take on, build something. And that's always been like anybody who ever started a school, I'm sure, had to deal with that. Anybody who ever planted a church had to deal with that, I'm sure. And goes to a city and says, or even just says, "Hey, we're planting a plant from this church across town." Like, oh, what's wrong with this? What's wrong? You think like it's perennial and happens in Christian circles as well as any other. But yeah, that's just envy. That's just the same kind of conflict as everywhere.
Now, you said something as you were speaking there that I thought was really good, and I thought a lot of it was good, but right at the beginning, you said,
Thanks. I'm glad there
um,
was something. That's good.
yeah, yeah, and you said, a lot of times it's older women, um, doing this kind of thing, and I know this jab has been made, but it's made because there's so much truth to it. That's older women of both sexes. Um,
Sure.
but to that point, and I've seen this. I told you offline. I'm in the PCA world, and I've seen it in our world. So I am the first guy to kind of point the guns and point the fingers back at myself and my own compatriots. So in so many circles, both Christian and non-Christian, it's always very easy to point your ammunition at everyone outside your own camp. But I think all camps do better when they police themselves, right?
Mhm.
So I look at my own world in the PCA and I see those fault lines. To kind of piggyback off of Vody Balcom's wonderful book from a few years back, that there are real fault lines, and you see it all over X all the time. I know Pastor Wilson and Pastor White and Joe Boot and some of them a few years ago, well, not even a few years ago, but about 18 months ago or so, had kind of a pretty public blow up, and again, it seemed to be along kind of generational lines. Now, that's probably an oversimplification, but you do see a lot of that happening where and I'm saying as someone who's approaching middle age or is firmly in middle age, that drive, that motivation, that fire that you have when you're 18, 19, 20, 25, it starts to diminish as you get older. It just does. I mean, that's part of the aging process. You're not nearly as gung ho about a lot of stuff, sadly. And again, there whole that could be an entire episode in and of itself. So I sometimes wonder Is that just generational? I mean, and I mean strictly generational. The older generation has somewhat lost some of that fire. They look at the young people and they think, "Hey, calm down a little bit." And of course, then the young people look at the older ones and go, "Well, just if you're gonna die like that, just go ahead and lay down." You know, I mean,
Mhm.
and so there's this natural animosity almost between the 2. Where in the middle, because you see wonderful examples of this all over scripture, where an older generation comes alongside a younger generation, whether it's Paul and Timothy or on and on and on. And you kind of go, we should be doing the opposite. The older ones among us should be looking at the 19, 20, 25 year olds and going, man, I'm excited to see you so passionate about whatever it is, XYZ. And how can I come alongside you? And yes, maybe temper some of your zeal, because sometimes zeal without wisdom is silly. But wisdom with no zeal doesn't get much done. So how do we partner, whether it's in the Christian world or in the political world, or just, my goodness, as fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, and say, you know, take the good nuggets from what's going on, add to those the wisdom that I've earned from years of being on earth, and just move forward.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'll speak more generally about like the generational thing. I think that generational conflict is kind of inevitable,
Yep.
but the when that's happening within sort of natural bonds, it's much easier to deal with, right? So, there being people around you, your pastor talking to you is very different. And like like you can, if you build an actual community and know somebody face to face and, oh, I know that person, I know what their intentions are, we can talk. That's much more natural than when trust bonds are sort of spread over the internet. And rather than having trust bonds that are natural, and I see that person when I go to the store, or I see that person when I walk in the door at my home, I know that, like, I live with that person. Those are much easier to deal with. And when trust bonds are expanded over the internet, they're much more fragile. And I think that that's a problem, and
Yep.
especially when we live in, so spread out over the internet, and then post 2020, every institution is automatically seen as suspect. So trust is, so this fragile trust that was spread across the internet gets broken up, and so nobody has anybody, nothing, no, there are no trust fallbacks unless you've built one, unless you're around people, unless you have uh, those organic networks again where you see people around. So that's it puts things in a pretty ugly situation where nobody, people who have talked maybe twice in their lives, or maybe just interacted with content, then go, I trust you, I don't trust you, and then those things get broken and nobody really knows, nobody's accountable to anybody. It's a strange thing, but it's much easier to do when an actual like community, when you know these people. So yeah, if my dad or my pastor had something to say to me, I would listen to that person more easily than I would somebody who's far away. And that's the tragedy, is that people don't trust their pastors anymore, and that in many cases, because after 2020, that lack of trust was somewhat justified.
Yeah.
So that's ugly. That's not a positive thing. And so, but I do want to like, I don't quote Christopher Nolan movies very often, but like there's in Inception, right? They put the thing that haunts Leonardo DiCaprio is that he implanted this one idea into his wife, that hey, you need to get out of this dream world. It's not real. We have to die in order to get out of this dream world. We have to, and that thing becomes the thing that encompasses her whole life. The central idea that becomes everything. And so he can't reason with her anymore because this has become the central thing, and distrust of reality becomes her central way of being. And so of course she jumps off a building to, like, because this world isn't real. What does it matter? I need to get out. I need to get out. And so that's always a danger. It becomes lack of trust becoming the central reality can turn you into a schizophrenic. So that, and I think that people are in a the kind of situation where that's much more easy to do after 2020, and because of these sort of expanded subnatural internet trust lines. So it's an ugly situation on all fronts, and why the basics, like having strong families and strong churches, is the thing that has to have been working in the background the whole time. So like the as you want to build and as you want to like have people who like your content keep going out, the central thing, the build having wives that trust their husbands, and having children who respect their dads, love their dads, have fun with their dads, pastors who like congregants want to know what the pastor has to say, so they go to counseling, they set up the counseling appointments. Like that's real, like that's the stuff that matters, and where the trust bonds are again much more natural.
No, the importance of tribe, and local community. And again, and I mean that in every sphere of human governance, whether, of course, that's starting primarily at the home, the familial sphere, but even within the ecclesiastical or the governmental sphere. Um, Again, as a guy that talks a lot of politics, obviously you talk a lot of politics. The presidential race and just the presidency in general sucks so much air out of the political room. But guys that follow this like you and I do are the first ones to kind of say the the stuff that the president's doing from day to day really doesn't affect your life almost at all. I'm not going to say none. I mean, there is global geopolitics that, I mean, they really can trickle down and affect you. But your local sheriff, the mayor of the town you live in, for many, even Christians, the local school board, I mean,
No.
they have a massive impact on your life, and you don't know their names most of the time. You know, you might know the mayor because he's on the TV sometimes, but I mean, you've probably never been to anything where he was speaking in person. I mean, it's just there's such a disconnect. And the internet, to your point, the internet has just exacerbated that to the next level, right? So I mean, we've had television for quite a while now, pushing 100 years or more now, and Walter Cronkite was a trusted voice,
Mhm.
and so our parents and our grandparents had all of that, and now we've just kind of taken what that was, shifted it from major media, ABC, NBC, CNN, and shifted it to guys like us, or
Mhm.
maybe guys bigger than us, maybe Tucker, or again, Nick Fuentes, um,
Mhm.
or Andrew Tate if you're on that side. But again, what do you know about those dudes? I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible. You don't really know anything about them. You don't know, again, are they respected by anyone in their real world?
Mhm.
It's, and I tell our people, both in our community here in which I live, but especially the community that the Lord has called me to serve at my church, when they disappear for weeks at a time or months at a time. And I'm like, guys, there's nothing less healthy that you could possibly do. What I mean? And
Mhm.
if you're leaving us to go somewhere else and plant yourself there and be a part of another body, I'll hate to see it happen, but my goodness, I would actually prefer that to what you're currently doing. You know,
Mhm.
if you don't want to be here, that's okay. Go plug yourself into another church across town or whatever, and be faithful to those people, and live life with those people, so that you do have exactly what you're talking about, where there are trusted people that really can come alongside and be there for you. I mean, it's,
Mhm.
I think, David being a king had very little accountability in some ways, until Nathan the prophet strolls in and wags his finger and says, "You are the man, David."
Yeah.
And
Right.
and he had to have that. I mean, what
Mhm.
would David's story be without that level of personal, accountability to someone like Nathan? But he also
Mhm.
had to have the mighty men, who were
Mhm.
the guys that he trusted, and
Right.
he could go, guys, there's a tough job. it,
Mhm.
it's going to be messy, and I need the men that I trust with my life to go and do it. So I mean, it's there's so many wonderful examples all throughout Scripture. but we see them in real life every day too. You know, the guys that isolate themselves, and again, I say this as a pastor who I've seen pastor after pastor after pastor after pastor fall. And you can almost predict it because it always starts with an isolationalist, some kind of
Mhm.
isolationalist mentality of I'm going to remove myself from any kind of accountability. Lawson, was a big one in our world, in the Reformed world, and especially in the Presbyterian circles, even though he wasn't Presbyterian. By golly, we liked him.
Mhm.
Um, and well, he was on the road all the time. He wasn't accountable to very many people. And as more and more of that stuff with his home church came out, and the weird relationship that they had with one another, again, you saw it, and you kind of went,
Mhm.
"How did no one see this coming?" And again, and I'm not throwing shade on Dr. Lawson. All of us are capable of gross sin. I mean, it's just endemic in who we are with the sin nature that we possess. I am radically aware of what I am and who I am and what I'm capable of. And I say to young pastors in our world, you know, technology, for all of the problems it can present. You've got a supercomputer in your pocket, and pornography is rampant, and you can have it, where 30 years ago you had to walk into a shady, gross place to get it. And I
Right.
mean, so sure, those negatives are there, but there's also find my friends, and I never turn it off. My wife can find me at any moment of any day, period. And I her. And that's a gift. I mean, and so there are also wonderful accountability ways that have been beefed up in our modern culture. And that's an incredible thing that we need to lean into and look at. And you're right, community is one of the most basic ones that if you're overlooking. My goodness, my encouragement to anyone watching that is disconnected themselves from real community, not this, as much as I want you to watch my show, and I want you to watch Wade's. I mean, Wade's is great. You've got to have human interaction. It's
Mhm.
imperative that we have that kind of interaction. We were created in the image of God, and God Himself is community. The three in
Mhm.
one, the one in three. I mean, the Trinity in and of itself is a small community. So it's that cannot be overstated. I'm so glad you brought that up. To that point of kind of older generation, younger generation, trying to see the best side of each other, and maybe join forces or help where they can, even when there may be some built-in side eyeing, that's just like you said, that's kind of comes with it. I'd love to get your thoughts on the very recent, and this has happened since the November election, since the government shutdown was fixed, which I laugh at.
Mhm.
Um, is President Trump and newly elected New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani have now
Yeah.
met.
Mhm.
What say you?
I think, yeah, I loved the, I think it's very cool that Trump did it. I think that's very fun. It also just sort of, I like the way Trump kind of little boyed him, sort of like he did with, with, like, the
Um,
Ukraine guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm drawing a
Zelensky.
blank too.
There we
Zelensky,
go.
yeah.
Yeah, it was very much like pat him on the head and, he'll do a good job. It'll be good, and, oh, that's so fine. You can say like patting him on the shoulder and stuff like this. It's like Trump brought him into his world and decided on the tenor of the meeting. And the
Yeah,
tenor of the meeting was going to be, hey, come on in here. We're going to talk. Let's chat. And the tenor of the meeting was not what Mamdani's fans wanted it to be. I think that's the key takeaway. It's like the vibe of him having a pally conversation with Donald Trump is not the thing that I mean, and that's why he's having to go on every media show now and explain why he was palling around with a fascist. And
yep,
yeah, I think it's a beautiful, and none of that was said. Like none of it was here's what I'm gonna do. It was just again, Trump setting the tone. Here's what we're gonna do. It's gonna be a fun time. You're gonna come in here and we'll talk about it. And they have the private meeting, they have the public thing, and Trump sits down. Mamdani stands up. Beautiful, beautiful. He gets to sit behind the Resolute desk. Mamdani has to stand there and sort of answer questions again, like he's on trial or something.
mhm,
Yeah, no, it was a masterclass in making people not take anything he says seriously, right? Okay, so if Donald Trump's a fascist and I'm going to fight him and all this sort of stuff, and it also sets Trump up to be like, well, we had a conversation, we talked, and well, if you're going to protect, if you're going to turn away ICE agents, then we'll deal with it. Like he's created the relationship that he is the superior and Mamdani is the inferior, even though Mamdani doesn't have like any more reporting. He doesn't report to the president any more than you and I do. He in that meeting, it looked like a junior employee and the CEO. And yeah, I think that dynamic, whatever Trump does after that, will look much more normal and fun than if he were to have just like refused a meeting with him and said, and then said, all right, well, we're going to send in ICE anyway. So I think I think it's a good way to set up the relationship. I was impressed as a audience member. How about you?
I would agree, and I think Trump is one of the best in the world at this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think he's the best. I've seen him look smaller in meetings. And I could name a few names in which I think he does. And again, and I'm a huge Trump supporter, voted now 3 times for him. I mean, so again, anytime I say anything that is somewhat negative of Trump, it's always like, oh, you're Marjorie Taylor Greening, and I'm like, no. I mean, there have been times in the room with Putin that I wish he were stronger. There were times, with Netanyahu, I wish he were stronger.
Mhm.
You know, but again, those are very powerful countries with their own very powerful leaders. That again, the dynamic is a lot closer than Mamdani. I mean, again, the offices are a lot closer. I thought he did this masterfully back in his first term with Kim Jong Un.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Everyone acted like, oh, how could he? I thought he made an isolationist come out of isolation and meet him.
Uh-huh.
And
Yep.
yes, he did it in his country. But again, that in itself was a statement, of
Yeah, yeah.
the evil Satan America, no, I stepped foot in your country and you shook my
Yeah.
hand. I mean,
Yeah.
he really is masterful at
Mhm.
all of the ways of communicating. Yes, mouth being the primary one he uses, but his body language, the framing of that, as you said, him sitting at the Resolute desk, Mom Downey standing there like a child. I mean, you know, is
Yeah.
that is an incredible,
Yeah.
beautiful use of the bully pulpit and saying, son, you need to come to the office and meet with me.
It's the same. Yeah, it's the same place all his staffers stand when they do Q&As or like when they do press stuff, which I loved. And one thing to the Kim Jong Un thing, one of the greatest clips from the first Trump administration was Trump talking to the press and saying, "Hey, everybody," talking to the camera guy, and he says, "Everybody looking handsome, skinny." And then the camera guy, like a mockumentary, just turns to Kim Jong Un
It, it
with his
you
shiny fat face. It's so good.
you
It's so
can't
good.
screw. I mean, that's what makes Trump so must watch TV is
Yeah.
you don't know what he's going to do, you don't know what he's going to say, you don't know
No.
what moments are going to be scripted or unscripted. And I know a lot of his political benefactors would say, well, when he stays on script, and some of the best things he's done is when he's went off script.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, fight when you've just almost had your head blown off.
Hmm.
That's that was the most
Inspired. Oh yeah. That was so
that was
good.
the most powerful political
Yeah.
moment of my lifetime.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never in my lifetime seen anything that was as transformative and immediately took every man in the United States that still had testicles and went, I'll follow that dude
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
incredible. I mean, that
Right.
he's bleeding and just got shot, and he's
Hmm.
yeah, even in defiance of his own personal protection, stands
Hmm.
up and goes, "You missed,"
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Secret Service trying
dude.
to pull him down.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
No,
just
it's great.
that moment
Yeah.
was incredible, right?
Hmm.
So I I would be again remiss to have you on my program, and I want to start wrapping up because I want to be respectful of your time. You did an episode recently, and for those who may not be familiar with your format, again, it's you sitting exactly where you're sitting. It's a monologue type show, and usually it's very quick, and that's one of the things I love about what you do is there's a lot of this online, of hey, it's an hour and a half. If some guys it's 3 hours. Yours are so bite-sized that, I mean, I can listen to them going to get my kids picked up from school. I mean, and you pack a ton into such a quick amount of time. And I say that to your immense credit. It's a really well done program. But you did an episode recently where you said everything now is about immigration. And I'm here just in the greater Charlotte area, and we've just had ICE. They're still actually in North Carolina, but they did leave Mecklenburg County, which is where Charlotte resides. And I mean, and it's been, no matter how you feel about ICE, about immigration, about what's going on with it, it's been distracting as someone who
Mm.
lives here. Um, they're and I don't know if they were connected and tied. We're still, the local authorities are still getting to the bottom of it. But in a town that is the same town my three kids were born in, the hospital that they were delivered in is in Concord, North Carolina. And in Concord, North Carolina, at the annual tree lighting, 4 people were shot. Which, I mean, Concord, North Carolina is not a city. It's I mean,
Mm.
it not really.
No.
Um, so it's, if this is happening here, then this is a problem, and it is really happening everywhere. And you could say, well, I stirred things up. Maybe. Again, that's another episode. That's something that's worth debating probably. But I thought your episode on the importance and the significance and kind of the permanence now of this topic of immigration was so brilliant. Could you walk the audience, kind of as our final topic, through a little bit of what you're seeing in that realm, and kind of um, what maybe they're missing?
Yeah, my main focus in that video was about elections. So, and I think that's a central reality is that so if you're in, as I said earlier, universal suffrage democracy, it matters who the people are. So,
Mhm.
if it matters who the demos is. So, if you've got a bunch of people who don't care about George Washington, then they're not going to vote in a way that George Washington would have even recognized. So the elections themselves, it just will continue to become about pandering to sort of ethnic strife and finding conflicts that already exist and hopefully grabbing as many of those different ethnic groups as possible, which at that point you're not talking about making sure that America is good for Americans. You're talking about just getting enough power, and then the power comes from, well, whatever I have to do, I can pander to this, pander to that. So you're not leading them, you're just sort of responding to them so that you get the power. And that's so as people talk about our democracy, as things have turned more and more democratic, then of course things have turned into more and more pandering. And I would rather, if somebody's going to try to make life better for people in order to get their votes, then I would rather those people be Americans, and I would
Yeah.
rather those people have ourselves and our posterity, right? The people who are the American people. So I think that's the shift that I would like to see. But at some point, if all of this sort of all of the rushes of people come in and again keep having kids, and then those kids are now citizens, then the anchor baby phenomenon is a real thing and brings in people who have all sorts of their own bones to pick with America and bones to pick with each other. Then our politics become about ethnic squabbles from thousands of miles away. So you have people like the Minneapolis mayor race. You had a bunch of Somalians who didn't vote for the Somalian candidate because he was from a different tribe of Somalians that was warring against their tribe. And so like Minneapolis politics being decided by ethnic animus in Somalia. I don't like that. I think that's a like I don't think anybody should like that. There's the people of Minneapolis, the people of Minnesota generally should be able to talk about the issues that affect them and not try to make sure that somebody's ethnic squabble is settled in the way that they want it to, and things that are basically foreign to us, things that we don't understand, we don't know the history of it. If I have to look up a Wikipedia article to even understand what the issues are in a Minneapolis mayoral election, that's a problem. And so I think that's one illustration of how electoral politics is changed by all this sort of stuff. Same with Mamdani. Mamdani did ads in like 5 different languages and was trying to get as many of these ethnic groups as possible to vote for him. And then the population of New York, I think being something like I think it was 40% foreign born, you as a politician, you will market to those people. You will campaign to that kind of city differently than you would in a city that have people that grew up in New York and have roots in New York and love the place because that's where their dad lived, that's where their granddad lived. They know that place. It changes electoral politics in a central way. But it also I didn't want to leave off in that video that it changes the broader culture. So as mass immigration happens, you're importing a lot of cultural problems. So we have a lot of problems here in America, a ton of social problems, a ton of cultural problems, and those things are not going to be helped by bringing in other people's social problems. And again, these ethnic conflicts, so that you can't go to a store without hearing 5 or 6 different languages. People don't feel safe there. People don't. It's in the same way that like there's a reason that people aren't comfortable with that sort of thing. And it's not bigotry to say that. It's just saying, well, if I can't even understand what they're saying, then how can I know that we're communicating, that I can get stuff done? What's great about like small towns, I grew up in several small towns. I grew up in one in particular, but it's like the everybody there is speaking in shorthand, right? So like you don't say the full name of the street that you're talking about because everybody
Yeah.
knows the sort of shortened version of it. The shorthand that develops based on who has lived there for a while. That's something that you lose if you throw a bunch of people into that same kind of pond. So we in our sort of Western optimism have assumed that everybody in the world is basically a Westerner. They just need to live here, and then we can all have the best food in the world, and we get the best restaurants.
Right.
But people don't work the same, and cultures that have been developed over the course of thousands of years are much thicker than people we tend to think they are. We tend to think that you have these multi-branch cultures and you can just like uproot the whole thing and plop it here and nothing changes, and or that these two trees can exist side by side without pulling resources from one from the other. It's a naivete about culture. It's a naivete about again, that shorthand, the things that people take for granted. And it doesn't end up just affecting this just the places that it happens. So right, so New York, if New York becomes and is 40% foreign born, New York is a leader of the country in many ways,
Hmm.
in the entertainment industry, in fashion, and like in everything. Like there's a reason in trade. There's a reason that New York is seen as this sort of one of the centers of America. And so if that falls to like a bunch of ethnic squabbles, then the country itself is at some level like you can't just break one piece off of it and go like, well, we're not unaffected because I live in Idaho. I'm far away from New York. I haven't been there in years. It does affect what we think of as being acceptable. And if we accept that happening and just go, oh, Minneapolis, it can fall, whatever, or oh, New York, it can fall, whatever, then yeah, we're giving up. We're giving up huge battlegrounds, and we're just hoping that it doesn't get to us while we're still alive, which is at some level that same kind of selfishness. Because it's like I have kids, I want them to be able to grow up in America that my parents and their parents would recognize and would think of. Obviously there's technical change and there's all sorts of things change, right? But I don't want it to go away. I don't want it to just become. I don't want America to just be another. I don't want New York City to be just another city like Brussels, which is like huge weekend markets where you can't hear like French spoken, or like there's no and the same with Paris, same with like uh, London. I don't want New York to just be another one of those. And I like New York City as messed up as it is, and I like America. I like Moscow, Idaho. I want Moscow, Idaho to continue at some level. So wanting
Yeah.
some kind of continuation, that's just called conservatism, right? And I think that's a, a vision of conservatism that isn't just, well, as long as they assent to the ideas, as long as everybody said the right thing, then we can keep going. Turns out that culture is a much deeper thing. Turns out that the behavior is something that has, again, developed where they have their shorthand, we have our shorthand. Those aren't going to mesh quite as easily as we think they are. So there's the electoral problem. There's the general kind of cultural problem of, hey, I like America. I know people who have lived in Minneapolis. Like this is not abstract. This is and wanting that kind of thing to continue is not hatred of the other thing, but it's just love of the thing you want to preserve.
No, that's incredibly true on every front. I would even add, again, can't take my pastor hat off ever. I would add to that I mean, you've talked about the social implications, certainly there are economic implications you didn't even get into, but those we've
Yeah.
all seen. And the political implications. There's huge spiritual implications. You
Yeah.
know,
Oh yeah.
at what point, as a predominantly Protestant nation, do we think that we can bring in, and I don't mean just nuns, NESs, from
Hmm.
European nuns that are just kind of Christian background. I'm kind of agnostic atheist, but I was raised in a Christian worldview. No, no, I'm talking Muslims and Hindus and every other truly pagan religions. How many do you think you can absorb
Right.
before something fundamentally shifts in a way that by the time you've noticed, you'll be so uncomfortable with it. Again, your kids, your grandkids are going to go, well, yeah, we have prayer times. We have 5 prayer
Hmm.
times at school. I mean, duh. Why wouldn't we
Yeah.
have that?
Right.
And it's like, I can think of a number of reasons why you might not have that.
Yeah.
And again, being in Charlotte or in the greater Charlotte region, and before I got into the ministry, I was in real estate for 20 plus years, come from a real estate family. I just read an article last week. It said for the last 20 years, here are the fastest growing, or really just the percentages of every major city in North America. It wasn't just the US. So it had, Vancouver and Toronto and all of that. And number two, from 2004 to 20, or pardon me, 2005 to 2024 was the article. The second fastest growing major city in America was Orlando, and it's grown 53% in that 20-year span. That's huge. That's an
Yeah.
incredible amount of growth in 20 years. Charlotte was number 1 with a bullet.
Okay.
93% growth in 20 years. Now, as someone who lives here, I can tell you, you feel it every day. You feel it in the
Mhm.
roads, you feel it in the schools, you feel it in every possible way one could feel that kind of growth at a meteoric, rise. Our infrastructure can't keep up. Our taxation has doubled and then doubled again and then doubled again. I mean, we have not grown at any kind of sensible rate, and it's just, and again, for some industries it's been wonderful, including real estate, and
Mhm.
if I'm being honest, a lot of realtors have made a fortune selling real estate, to
Mhm.
a population that's exploded. But there are other issues that come. I mean,
Mhm.
like I said, we had a shooting at the Concord Christmas tree lighting. That wouldn't have
Mhm.
happened 20 years
Right.
ago.
Yeah.
That never ICE didn't come to Charlotte 20 years ago. That doesn't happen in Charlotte. It's just, so it went from what was a cow town to, the second largest banking hub in America, the second largest, most people don't even know this, the second largest IT, or kind of, we are number 2 after Silicon Valley.
Oh
So I
wow.
mean, yeah, that's going to change your demographics. It's going to change everything about who you are as a place. I see this on a national scale, and I do think this is a people group that people have kind of slept on. And again, it's not a, do I hate these people? It's got nothing to do with that. These are you and I are discussing practical realities. And when I turn on Netflix, at least 1 out of every 10 shows that I see on my suggestion is Bollywood. It's
Mhm.
Indian of some kind.
Right.
You Usha Vance, and you see Vivek Ramaswamy, and you see, and again, this is a reality now in America. The
Mhm.
surplus, the influx of the Indian population in Charlotte, where again we are big in banking and IT,
Mhm.
has been massive.
Mhm.
And now they are building a massive, Hindu temple and statues and all the stuff, just like Houston's dealing with, right?
Mhm.
There are practical realities that come from all of this stuff. And so when guys like you and I, especially in the Christian world, are like, "Gosh, you guys talk about politics a lot," or yeah, because
Mhm.
my kids will deal with these realities.
Mhm.
You are dealing with these realities, even if you've buried your head
Yeah.
in the sand and think you're not. You are dealing with this world. So I'll end with kind of, and I know I've been flattering a few times, and it's not for flattery's sake. I mean it sincerely. You are doing great work. You are ringing a klaxon that I think oftentimes is overlooked and missed by so many, especially in the Christian world, because, well, golly, the red heifer hasn't been found yet, or whatever
Yeah.
thing, right? And so thank you, Wade, for what you're doing, what you I celebrate how you've kind of been found, and now you're getting invited on bigger and bigger programs, and they found out what so many of us that have watched you for a while are like, yeah, this guy's got a lot to say, and he's thought hard about it, and he says it in a way that is fun to listen to. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's been my honor. And so for all of you watching that support this channel, support the work that I do, thank you so very much for supporting Civically Minded. It has been an honor of my lifetime to spend 2 years of my life now doing this, and I hope it lasts for a much, much longer time. And until next time, remember, I'm always your host, Corey Wing. Be brave, be bold, and be civically minded. God bless.